Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the MMA Survivor Podcast. I'm Michael Hoad, joined by Mitchell Machtinger and Nick Ashbourne, and we'll be your hosts as we take you what was a pretty exciting first episode of Survivor Blood vs. Water 2. Now, for those of you who stumbled upon this hoping to find some mixed martial arts, I encourage you to stick around and give this show a listen. But guys, what did you think of the first episode of Season 29?
I liked it. I mean, it's tough doing Blood vs. Water when you don't have any returning players. But right off the bat, I got a really good vibe about the season. I think we're in for another good year.
Yeah, I didn't see any sort of obvious people who have terrible personalities or colossal blunders. So even the first decision seemed meaningful and important. It wasn't just trimming the fat off the top. The Exile Island aspect in the very first episode didn't seem as meaningful as it might be. That being said, the idea of not getting to mix with your tribe right away, I could see being a big disadvantage. We just didn't see that disadvantage play out as much as you might think.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be a devastating twist. I thought for sure whoever was sent to exile was going to get voted out of their tribe, but it didn't end up happening. Let's launch into the recap of the episode. So we start with day 0 again, which they did on the last season of Blood vs. Water. And each pair was given flint to practice making fire. So we see first Baylor and Missy, they're struggling to make the fire, but they get surrounded by these monkeys in the trees, and it just totally reminds me of a scene from the Hunger Games.
That was terrifying. I was just thinking if I was in their situation and being surrounded by like these barking like gorillas in the trees and you're just in the middle of a forest, it was pretty scary.
Yeah, in terms of the game itself, this day 0 didn't really offer very much, but at the same time I thought it did offer us a little bit of insight into the different teams that are playing. I made the point earlier in our draft that I thought West looked dumb. He proved to be dumb initially, and he never disproved that later on by losing the flint right off the top, even though him and his father were supposed to be relatively accomplished outdoorsmen. So
they're both firefighters.
Yeah, so they're both supposed to have these physical abilities, and they're all dressed up in their camo and whatnot. They're no strangers to the woods, and yet right away they totally have an epic fail off the top.
Yeah, Wes says the mental game will be one of his strengths, but then Keith pipes into the camera and says Wes is as mentally strong as a rock. So your comment is really holding true, and Mitch taking him first overall is not looking so hot right now.
As soon as I saw him, I instantly regretted the pick.
I was really impressed by Josh and Reed.
Yeah.
On day 0, they're big fans of the game. We see them catch a crab, and they've got their fire going, no problem. And they cooked the crab. Looked like they ate well that night. So I definitely like these two off the bat.
I think that we valued them pretty highly in the draft, and that was vindicated. Both of them, I mean, we're going to get into especially Josh, less so Reed. He was less of a factor. But we're going to get into both of them later in the podcast, and they both looked like they have potential off the top.
We also see Alec and Drew, and something that we didn't really know going in is they have a pretty big sibling rivalry. And Alec, being the younger brother, really wants to outdo his older brother in this one. I've got Alec on my team, so I'm hoping that he comes through.
I think you're going to see some interesting challenges where the two of them are kind of thrown together on purpose. It'll be random, quote unquote, but they'll be the ones facing each other. And there'll be some cool moments with those two because they both do appear to be decent athletes.
Yeah, there's usually that challenge with the sort of wrestling theme in the middle of the water. You have to push each other off the platform. We saw in a teaser for either next week's episode or the season in general that challenge is going to be back. So if those two square off in that challenge, that'd be pretty epic. On to day 1, the couples and pairings arrive at a bunch of ruins, and immediately this just reminds me of a Redemption Island arena, but as we know, it's not. Jeff asks everyone who was able to make fire, and pretty much everyone put their hand up, but one group that I noticed didn't put their hand up was Val and Jeremy, and they definitely did make fire. We saw it. Do you think this is a potential strategy to sort of appear weaker?
I actually didn't notice that, but it's funny that you point that out. Yeah, I mean, I'm not thinking about it now. I mean, I like it. They're firefighters, right? So, and they even said, like, you think that Jeremy's a firefighter, that as a firefighter, we wouldn't want to be starting fires. But, I mean, it doesn't put that huge target on your back. I guess it would have been a bigger target had, like, only 1 or 2 teams been able to start fire, but it seemed most of them were able to.
Yeah, the fact that basically everyone was, that sort of gambit didn't really play out for them, but the fact they were thinking is interesting, and I think we saw in the rest of the episode that both Jeremy and Val wound up being pretty strategic players, and we can argue about whether they were too strategic. We'll get to that later. But both of those players clearly have good heads on their shoulders.
On to the actual splitting of the tribe. There's a blue tribe and an orange tribe. Not going to butcher the names. We're just going to call them blue and orange. On blue, we have Reed, Keith, Jeremy, Missy, Drew, Julie, Kelly, Natalie, and John. And that leaves on orange, Josh, Wes, Val, Baylor, Alec, Rocker, John Rocker, Dale, Nadia, and Jacqueline. Quickly, first impressions, which tribe's better in your opinion, guys?
Actually, first, if you put the two tribes side by side, I was a big fan of the blue team. I think just overall they were stronger than orange or yellow.
Well, if you look at some of the equivalents too, for example, obviously each tribe is going to get that old man. They weren't both going to wind up on tribe. But the blue tribe gets the old man Keith, who is a little bit more physically capable. He's a firefighter. And the orange tribe gets Dale, who's doesn't appear to be very much when it comes to physicality.
Whoa.
We'll see. We'll see later. He has other aspects to his game, but my initial impression, at least in terms of physicality and challenges, because we don't really know about puzzles yet. We don't know who's good at puzzles. That's going to be a big factor. But yeah, I agree with Mitch. My first impression was that the blue tribe would be a little bit stronger.
So we move into the first reward challenge of the season. It's one person competing for each tribe, and it ends up being Jeremy for the blue tribe. And by default, Val has to compete against him.
What do you think of Jeremy volunteering to represent his tribe? Typically, it's not a good omen to be a leader this early in the game. So, in terms of that move, putting yourself out there, literally within the first hour as the leader to win reward for your tribe.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I would have preferred Jeremy take a back seat in this one, but later on he also starts playing pretty quickly, forming alliances, so that's just going to be his strategy going in. I wish he'd be more subdued, but it's just the type of guy he is, I guess.
I think in that scenario, you have more to lose than you have to gain. Because if you go out there and you lose, you look arrogant. You're like, I can win, and then you didn't win. And if you win, I don't think that the gain is that great, really, ultimately.
Yeah, he does end up winning. The challenge is to weave yourself through this rope maze cage thing, and that'll allow you to throw the ropes and grab these platforms, drag them back. He ends up beating his wife, which means his wife, Val, is sent to Exile Island, and he is just not pleased with this. He tears up a bit, and Jeff throws the next bomb on Jeremy and says he has to pick someone from his own tribe to go with Val, and Jeremy immediately picks Keith. He didn't know his name, but he said, I'll pick him because he clearly knows how to make fire and he can take care of my wife. Jeff makes the point that this is the guy who lost the flint and broke the other piece of equipment. So, do you guys like that he picked Keith to go with her?
I honestly think that, and when we talk about the MVP of the week, we're going to come back around this. I think this is the masterstroke of the episode. Jeremy, I don't think got off to a good start by volunteering. We covered that. I didn't think that was a wise idea. But he's put in a terrible position where he has to single out someone in his own tribe. And during that process, he managed to endear himself to the women by showing how much he gets emotional about losing his wife, compliment Keith by saying, you're a guy who I know is capable, and not really insult any of the threats on his tribe. So I thought he played that to the T as the best way you possibly could.
Yeah, Jeremy's rationale for sending Keith was spot on. He didn't make any enemies with it, and he sort of put the reasoning with his wife versus why he was sending Keith to exile.
So off to the beaches they go, 8 people per tribe, and the blue team is very happy with their reward, but Jeremy is still upset about it. But Jeremy immediately gets his head back on straight and starts playing Survivor, and playing Survivor pretty hard, a little too hard for my liking this early in the game. He immediately goes up to 3 of the females on his tribe, starts with Kelly, says that they need to stick together. Then he brings in Natalie and brings in Missy, the older female on the tribe. I don't know. I personally don't like that he's playing this hard right now.
I thought he was playing a bit hard too. I mean, obviously he was sort of the face of the tribe at Exile, And what struck me as a bit odd, he later aligned himself with Keith too to sort of form a 5, but he seemingly put himself with what you would think would be maybe the 4 weakest players on his tribe. So he's this big, strong, probably the strongest player on his tribe physically, and he aligns himself with 3 women and the oldest guy on his tribe.
That's going to be interesting in terms of whether his plan is to actually take out the threats not later in the game, as you often see, but get rid of them early, get them out of the way. If he thinks that his tribe, as constructed, can win the majority of the challenges, which it looks like they have a chance to do, then he doesn't have to worry about getting rid of these big, tough men in his tribe. He can just kind of keep them on, maybe pick them off one at a time. I understand that. I think you're right in that he went at it maybe a bit too quickly. At the same time, he seems to have the numbers at this point. He's got the woman. He took advantage right away of a lot of women's positive impression of him, and he capitalized on that immediately. And then, as we'll see later in the episode, he really did a good job bringing Keith into the fold. So he definitely put himself out there, and he took a risk. So far, it looks pretty good, but we'll see next time the Blue Tribe has to have a tribal council exactly how well that holds up.
Yeah, this strategy of aligning with, I guess, the quote-unquote weaker players of the tribe could be interesting. If he picks off some of those bigger threats, once they get to the merge, he could theoretically run the table in challenges with what's left facing him. But another thing you mentioned is having the numbers, and he's in a good position now. Yeah, I think he is, but in a couple weeks, if he's still taking on this leadership role, the leader tends to fall. All they'll need, if he has 5, is one of those people to flip over to the other side, and I think they target him right away. It's interesting, you mentioned in our draft that there's probably going to be a player that is like the leader of the dominant alliance but gets votes against them from the sort of sub-alliance all season. I think Jeremy could be that guy.
But again, in recent seasons, we've seen guys like Tony, who play a leadership role, go far, Coach, Boston Rob. Like, it's not unheard of for a guy in a leadership role to go far. Of course, I have a bias. This was my first pick, 2nd overall. But honestly, right now, if we were talking a little Survivor fantasy trades, there's not a single player I would trade Jeremy for straight up at this point in the game.
Interesting. Let's jump over to the Orange Tribe. Dale finds himself immediately on the outs with these younger people. He's 25 years older than most of them, and he is going over to grab some water and finds this mysterious token type thing on top of the well. Is this an idol?
It looks like an idol. I mean, normally we have to see people putting their hands in all these holes in trees where there's like deadly snakes and spiders and find these idols. That part blows my mind, but that's a whole other thing. It's weird to see it just out in broad daylight, but the first thing that comes to my mind, because nobody really confirmed that it was an idol, what if it's like a fake idol kind of thing? What if maybe they planted it to sort of run that confusion among camp that they think it's an idol, but it's actually not, and then someone ends up getting screwed over with it?
What blows me away is that Dale didn't really seem to react in any way to the. I mean, whether it's an idol, whether it's a fake idol, it's early. We're just speculating right now. But the fact that he just sees this and he's got other things on his mind is it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Dale immediately won me over. He realized that he was on the outs, needed to get back in the good books of the others. As his tribe mates are furiously rubbing sticks together trying to make fire, Dale is taking the steady glasses and sun approach. It's not working, and Dale needed to do something big.
Yeah, hold on. Before
Okay.
I'm gonna take this one on the reins. So from someone who wears glasses, I actually appreciate the shout out from Dale. But he ends up breaking them in half. What are you doing to double up the lens to build the fire? It works, but I don't know. Personally, I think my prescription is strong enough where I wouldn't have to do that. I could just use one eye. But you broke your glasses. He said they're only reading glasses, so for him, maybe it's not a big deal. But glasses are very important, and I don't think the message was conveyed clearly that that's a big deal. What he did was a huge sacrifice.
He needed to do it. I think he had to show his worth around the camp, and I honestly think if he didn't show that, he would have been gone.
Yeah, I agree with Hoad here. I think that there was no way he survives the first vote if he hadn't done something drastic, and he did. And now he's sitting in a pretty good spot in the game.
My luxury item would be a backup pair of glasses.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't take one either. Moving over to Exile Island, Val and Keith both have to choose an urn, and inside one of these urns is a blank piece of paper, and inside the other one has some sort of clue on it. Val gets the one with the clue. Keith's is blank. Val is just totally studying it while Keith is doing nothing. And then when Keith asks her what it is, she just says, like, oh, it's just something about camp. Like, come on, everyone knows that's the clue to the idol. She should have just told them.
But she could have known, like, she had to react on her feet. She could have known right away that he wouldn't have, like, he would have had a blank clue. So, in that sense, I think Keith should have pushed more, but I don't think either of them, their mind was, like, focused on, like, sort of exile at the time.
Yeah, I was kind of blown away that Keith seemed to kind of buy her story. He was like, oh, well, if it's just for camp, I don't have to worry about it. And as someone who has a stake in the Jeremy train, Keith's looking like a perfect stooge. And you need some stooges on your side if you're going to win in Survivor. Keith's got potential to be a big league stooge. I'm loving what I'm seeing from him.
Yeah, as we mentioned, it came out that Jeremy is a firefighter and Keith's a firefighter, so Keith has this instant bond with Jeremy. Could very well be his stooge. John and Drew, back at the blue camp, are the only ones building the shelter. No one else is really doing anything. But Drew, after he finishes building it, starts like boasting about his skills. This starts to rub people the wrong way. And I don't know. He should have just left it. I understand he was doing all the work, but he should have kept his mouth shut.
Yeah, he's got nothing to gain by doing that. Drew looked really bad out of the gate. I don't feel very great about having him on my team. He's a guy who could be a strong player in the competitive challenge context, but that's a big social blunder right off the top. If anything, he was in a position to look really good by saying, oh, everyone come back, like, the shelter's done, it's going to be awesome. Instead, he was like, bro, I made a shelter, it's so sick. And everyone's like, okay, great. So I think that he, not only did he do something bad, he had the opportunity for that to be a great situation, and he just totally mucked it up.
He blew it. I really wish he sat down on it and it broke. That would have been hilarious. Back at Orange Camp, Wes and Alec are starting to talk about John Rocker. So Wes approaches him, and Wes knows who he is. He calls him out on it. John lies, says his last name is Whitland or something. And then Wes has arguably the quote of the night. Does your last name start with R? Does it have 5 letters? And John Rocker's just like, no. But then eventually John Rocker does come clean to Wes, but tells Wes to keep it on the down low. And John Rocker wants to remain anonymous, so could be targeting Wes pretty early on.
Rocker's a big dude. Even in the challenges and just walking around camp, this guy is a monster. That was really surprising for me to see. He hasn't been like a professional athlete for probably 10 years now at least, but he's obviously kept in shape, and he's a scary man.
Yeah, and this is just another example of the nail boys not being the sharpest, Keith and Wes. I just think that Wes has put a target on his back as far as Rocker is concerned without getting anything to gain. Like, he could maybe kind of blackmail Rocker with this information, but I don't see that playing out well for him. So I don't think Wes really gained much by telling John he knew he was. Wes might have been better off to keep that information to himself and then maybe spread it to the tribe at an important juncture when maybe he would have needed Rocker to leave. Instead, he's created an uneasy bond between them that I don't think Wes is going to benefit from.
No, definitely not. And sticking with the Orange Tribe, Josh seems to have this allergic reaction to something. His eye puffs up, and then they realize that the leaves that they've used as the roof for their shelter are actually this like poisonous herb.
I think it was the sap.
The sap from
plant.
this plant is poisonous and like causes reactions, so they had to move that away. That was weird. But onto the immunity challenge. You have to crawl under this like, again, obstacle with nets and stuff. Grab bags from up top, and they have different tools in them. One has a rope, one has these little pegs. And then you have to climb a series of 3 walls using these tools, and on top of the 3rd wall is a puzzle.
All these challenges, I bet you every challenge this season, or at least like 75% of them, is going to involve something with a bag and puzzle pieces and trying to like reach for the bag and pull it towards you and then ending in a puzzle. It's been like that for a couple of years. It's because I think something with the water, like they can't use the water as like swimming somewhere. Maybe it's like the waves are too strong or whatever. But that's the vibe I've got from the past couple seasons.
Also, it helps level the playing field in terms of guys who are athletically dominant. Like, there aren't that many challenges that John Rocker you can pit against, say, his girlfriend Julie, that would be fair. And the puzzles are a really good way to level the playing field.
But they're tribal challenges, right? You wouldn't have to pit loved ones against each other.
Yeah, but I mean, down the road, if that's sort of what the challenges are going to be like this season in a general sense, then it helps even it out.
So the blue team ends up winning, but for me, the most impressive performer in this was John Rocker. He was a monster. Like, he was lifting the people up to grab the bags on his own, whereas the others were boosting with 2 people. He was at one point just stationed at the base of the wall, and people were using him as a human ladder to get up.
He literally put the team on his back.
Literally, and it was really impressive, but Blue pulled it out.
I don't know if you guys have seen Guardians of the Galaxy, but he looked like Groot out there. Just huge, strong, human tree-like figure just hauling people over the wall. It was something else. I haven't seen
it, but I'm imagining it as similar to the Thing from the Fantastic Four.
Not so far. Not so far off.
Back at camp, Val, since she was just at exile, feels like she's in jeopardy. So with her clue, she immediately begins to look for the idol. But Dale, feeling the target on his back, wants to spread the word about Nadia's tactics on The Amazing Race. I am not familiar with them, but he said that she backstabbed people using the U-turn twist on Amazing Race. So the guys seem on board to get Nadia out.
It was a good move by Dale because he realized that he probably was going to go home. So before everyone could sort of start scrambling and decide what to do, he flipped the script and turned it on to Nadia.
Nadia approaches Josh and says that she has his back because she considers him one of the girls, which he hates when people do that. She doesn't know that, but Josh is looking like he's going to be the swing vote. Baylor says that she'll vote whatever way Josh votes. So it's looking like it's either going to be Nadia or Dale, but Val tries to get in with the girls, and we've seen this, Mitch, in Big Brother, that Val wants to start an all-girls alliance, and this just doesn't usually work out.
Also, I think it was interesting that she tried to position it as some kind of historically significant thing, like, we can be the first ones to form it. And it was just, we've seen it. It's not a totally unheard of thing, a women's alliance, and she tried to position it as if they were kind of revolutionaries, and it just didn't make any sense to me.
I think what sort of happened with all-girls alliances is they sort of happen later in the game or when a whole tribe starts off as women. And when there's been a split between the genders on a tribe, it hasn't really happened with all-girl alliance in that sense.
So at Tribal Council, Nadia is the one voted out. There were also votes cast against Dale and 1 vote cast against Baylor.
One of the things that Val said at Tribal Council that sort of blew my mind was Jeff asked her about Exile Island, and she's like, yeah, it gave me time to explore and find new things.
Right.
So he didn't even ask her about the immunity idol, and she brought it up sort of without mentioning it.
Yeah, I don't like how she did that. Definitely not.
In general, I think people share way too much information at Tribal Council. I don't understand how they benefit. It happens every year. People say stuff at Tribal Council that just kills them. If Jeff asked me a question at Tribal Council, I'd be like, oh, yeah, you have a point there. That's something that maybe we'll be considering going forward. I'd be giving him like the cliche hockey player answers.
Mitch, with Nadia gone, that's one of your players. Let's hear the point recap from this week.
Okay, so I'm in a really big hole pretty early, considering that I only had 2 blue players on my team, the winning tribe, so right away I didn't get a lot of points. So Nick has 29. Hoad, Michael has 20, and I'm all the way at 3.
Oh,
so
devastating.
I had the first one voted out, and again, I had 4 orange people on my team. Nick is sitting pretty right now with 4 blues, but you never know what's going to happen next week. And Michael, you have an even split. So I didn't count Dale's idol find because it's sort of unconfirmed and a bit murky on what really happened there. And I guess it was kind of fitting that Nadia was the last pick of the draft because she went out first. And just a preview about the point totals, we saw in the season preview at the end of the episode that there's going to be a quitter this season. So we're all crossing our fingers hoping that They're not on our team, and there's also a Medivac, it looks like.
So let's give us a review. How much points do we lose for quit, and how many points do we lose for Medivac?
Quitting is minus 30.
Yeah.
So Nick,
Wow.
you could drop 0 right away. And a Medivac is minus 5.
That's still so harsh for me.
It's not. Sometimes people were criticizing me for it. I was getting a lot of hate, but I was like, you know what? Sometimes there needs to be X factors that nobody can control, and it's just part of the game.
I'm really crossing my fingers for Josh. I think he's a strong player, but if his eyes or something gets worse, that could be problematic.
That's true.
But he seems to have a good attitude about it so far.
Suck it up and survive. I think that was the title of the episode, actually.
So, in that sense, we're going to move on to our MVPs and LVPs of the week. I'll start. My MVP of the week is Josh. He was put into a swing vote position early, and he handled it well. He didn't blow up at Nadia for calling him a girl all the time, or saying he's one of the girls, which he hates, and rightfully so. And even though he didn't actually end up voting for Nadia, he sort of threw his vote away. He handled it with grace, and I think he played it well.
I'm going with Josh as my MVP as well. Everyone seems to trust him. He's the guy that everyone approaches. It could backfire on him later, playing both sides, but for now he's my MVP. We've seen the swing vote often be the person who gets cut, but that comes later on. So right now I think Josh is sitting pretty.
And one underrated thing about Josh is how he wanted to throw away his vote, and he cast it at Baylor, probably his closest ally. So that's an easy one for him to explain. If sort of one of the guys, say if he cast it at John Rocker for whatever reason, that might have been tough for him to explain to John what happened. He can sit Baylor down and say, I knew you weren't in trouble. I threw on your way because I was trying to burn my vote. No hard feelings, and they can move on.
That's what I thought. It could be like, look, like, this is how I think the vote's going to break down. Like, if you see your name pop up, like, it was from me, and like, I'd want you, like, I'm telling you now so you can trust me in the future, kind of thing.
And also, it takes 1 point away from Hoad, who has Baylor, so I was in favor for that reason. My MVP of the week is Jeremy, because I think we're talking about this week. I think Josh is in a better position going forward, but this week, the way Jeremy handled a very, very difficult situation really impressed me, and he may have locked up an alliance that could be strong. We'll see about that going forward. I understand the concerns about him going forward. As you guys have said about players who play too fast, they can see it fall apart for them. But I think this particular week, he had the toughest situation, and he came out of it pretty good.
Mitch, who's your LVP?
I had to go with Nadia. Again, she was the first voted out. And again, just for her comments toward Josh, they really rubbed me the wrong way. And again, credit to Josh for not making it an issue.
I'm also going with Nadia. This is a tough decision. A lot of people didn't really do anything this week, which is understandable considering there are so many people in the game right now. I was going to go with Missy because she didn't do anything on the shelter and didn't do anything in the challenge. She says she's good at puzzles, but she wasn't one of the people solving the puzzle for the blue team. But, Nadia got voted out first, so just got to go with her.
So you guys had a little bit of concern about my bias by picking Jeremy as the MVP. I'm going to pick one of my own for the LVP, though. I'm going to go with Drew because I think Nadia did say some pretty horrific and ignorant things, and obviously she deserves some blame for that. But it wasn't really her fault that she got voted out. She was targeted right away by the men. She didn't really do anything bad. Whereas Drew, I see as a person who had a possibility to be in a really good spot and really undercut himself. So I think he made an awful move socially, and that's why he's my LVP.
Yeah, a couple of my honorable mentions, just thinking about it for MVP. Julie, actually, when she called Drew out on it in her confessional, that sort of surprised me from her. And also, just thinking about it now, Dale, for even just surviving the first week, he made Fire for his tribe, and he convinced them to vote out Nadia. So that's just a little addition I have.
That brings us to the best and worst first impressions of the week. I'm going to go first because Mitch just mentioned Dale. He is my best first impression. He identified he was not in with his tribe, so had to prove himself. Went to extreme measures by breaking his glasses.
Very extreme. I don't think it's been stated enough how important and like crucial this decision was.
So that could affect his long-term game, not being able to see much. But first impression for me goes to Dale.
My worst first impression, I don't really have a best. I mean, there were some people not
Mitch hates the cast.
Not to no, actually really like the season. Just no one struck me as like, wow, it's the best. I mean, maybe Josh again and Reed, just because I seem to be a personal fan of his. But Wes was actually my worst first impression. I know I took him first overall, and it was just seeing these people on TV versus a like 20 by 20 picture online. Obviously my fault for not doing enough research, but I agree with Nick's assessment that he just has a dumb face. And as soon as I saw him, I was like, man, I can't believe I drafted this guy first overall. And he lost the Flint, and he didn't convince me that I should have taken him first.
So just to clarify, no best first impression, really officially?
I'll say Josh again.
All right, Nick, how about you?
In terms of my worst first impression, I'm going to concur with Mitch. I was skeptical of Wes going in, and he just confirmed all the bad things I thought about him in the first episode. In terms of the best first impression, and this is more relative to expectations, I'm going to go John Rocker. I thought that he showed himself to be possibly the strongest person in the game physically, and he had a strategic mind about him, and he wasn't a complete asshole to anyone. So I think for those three reasons, he really impressed me in a good way. I don't know if he's in with the right alliance, but I do know that that he showed himself to be pretty strong.
I hope we get to see a Rocker Jeremy duel. I think that'd be really intense.
They'll rig it so that happens, I think, for sure in the pushing one.
I think they choose though. The tribe chooses
who they put up.
Maybe they'll purposely punt the one against
Yeah.
Rocker. They'll throw in like Julie. That'd be interesting.
Okay, my worst first impression is actually Val. There's an honorable mention to Wes, as you guys have said. I won't rehash that. But Val, I found, just came off too strong. I thought she was going to be a really likable, sort of subdued person, but she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Fierce competitor, even though she was struggling in that challenge against her husband to climb over the rope maze. And then when she read the exile clue in front of Keith and just played it off like it was nothing, I don't know. Like, come on, everyone knows what that is. So, going with Val. And finally, I know it's tough to predict, but we'll each pick someone from each tribe and say who's going to go next week if that tribe loses. Nick, why don't you start us off?
Well, we've already set it up with the quitting and the med evac, so I'm going to incorporate that into my guesses. For blue, I'm going to guess Natalie for quitting, because without her twin, she can't go on. And then for a med evac on orange, I'm going to go Josh. Unfortunately, he's a great player. I have him on his team. I think maybe his eyes get worse. He's the closest person to having an obvious medical issue.
Yeah, just to clarify though, there's no guarantee that these things are going to happen next week versus the rest of the season. But when you said Natalie is the
That
quitter,
makes so much sense.
I never thought of it, and my jaw hit the floor. Wow. Oh, that'd be devastating. I'm already not confident in my team at all to this point. And if that happens, I don't know. I think I just drop everyone to free agents.
So who do you think's going then, Mitch?
For blue, I'm gonna go with Missy, just because she's the oldest female. By default, it's always a safe bet to go first. And for orange, I'm gonna say Val or Jacqueline. Am I only allowed to pick one? One. I'll say Jacqueline.
Okay. I'm going to go with Val on orange. The guys now are in position to just pick off the ladies, so I think Val, them knowing that she's looking for the idol and her being on exile, she could be sent again next week. Usually the same person just goes over and over. So I think she's going to go. The other tribe is harder to judge. We don't really know the intricacies yet, aside from Jeremy's alliance. The one, correct me if I'm wrong, but the one female who was not in Jeremy's alliance was Julie. Did he go to her?
There was no confirmation, I think.
So,
I think it's kind of implied that he would, but it hasn't happened yet.
Since it was not explicit, I'm selecting Julie to be the one kicked off if Blue Tribe loses. Well, that's going to do it for the first weekly recap of the Survivor San Juan del Sur Season 29. This has been the MMA Survivor Podcast. I'm Michael Hoad, and I've been joined by Nick Ashbourne and Mitchell Machtinger. We'll be back next Thursday for the next installment of the show.